I want to begin tonight's broadcast with the shooting at Saturday night's White House Correspondents' Dinner. Today, the suspect, 31-year-old Cole Allen from California, appeared in court for his preliminary hearing. He is charged with trying to assassinate the President of the United States, taking a firearm across state lines to commit a felony, and discharging a gun during a violent crime. A senior White House official tells MS Now that President Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, will hold a meeting on presidential security early this week. That meeting will include the White House operations team, Secret Service, and Homeland Security. Today, Trump's top law enforcement officials spoke after the suspect's court hearing, and Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche defended the response of officers on Saturday night.
I want to make this clear. This man was a floor above the ballroom with hundreds of federal agents between him and the President of the United States. Law enforcement did not fail. They did exactly what they are trained to do. This was not an accident. It was the result, as we know now, of preparation.
I want to bring in Rob D'Amico, MS Now national security and intelligence analyst. He's also a former FBI supervisor and founder of Sierra One Consulting. Rob, you and I were on MS's broadcast just within minutes of this incident taking place on Saturday. And today you wrote a piece with the headline, "There is no excuse for the Secret Service failures we saw on Saturday night." Given what we just heard from Todd Blanche, how do you respond to that?
Well, it's the fault of the administration to say, oh, everything went great, instead of just realizing, like, look, the agents themselves and the uniform officers did a great job, and you can't take that away from them. But the setup is what caused it. It's like if I was a Marine platoon commander and I set up a defense with a huge gap in it, and then they came through and one of my Marines jumped on a grenade, he's still heroic. He still did what he's supposed to do. But it was my fault that I set up something that allowed it. And that's what happened. They allowed someone to run right through their stop.
How unusual is it? So normally, sometimes a president, whether it's Donald Trump or not, attends the White House Correspondents' Dinner. But what's unusual, even about the attendees, we had the president, we had the vice president, we had possibly every cabinet secretary. It was almost like we had the whole administration there. How does one secure an event with so many high-profile, important people in the government, as well as people in corporate America? How does one do this?
If you're going to have the hotel open, then you have to make it so to get to that venue, to get to that ballroom, has to be funneled and controlled, and it wasn't. I went to a Four Seasons when Netanyahu was there because my friend was staying there, and they stopped my vehicle. They searched it before I even got on the property. I actually was carrying. I had to go across the street, park it, put it in there. So and then they magnetometer everyone going in that hotel. So why is it different for a foreign, head of state that they're doing it better than they are for an entire administration that was at one event?
So to me, there's nothing about this that should be politicized, but the White House is now taking this opportunity to sell the president's very, very unpopular plans for the ballroom. And today, Todd Blanche said there is no better example than this incident to show why this ballroom is necessary. What's your take?
Well, it's just they take an unfortunate incident, political violence and what's going on in this country, and they take it and they turn it like, hey, we want this, so we're going to use this. I mean, the memo must have just blown out, and then all of a sudden everyone started talking about it because they weren't talking about it right after. And then they thought, wait a second, this can justify our ballroom. Now, there's a bunch of conspiracy theories online about it, that it was set up. I don't believe that. But they're using every opportunity they have. I mean, it almost goes back. As soon as, President Trump was almost assassinated in July, I'm like, he won the election. And it's like they're using something like that to go for this ballroom. And it's just unfortunate.
All right. Well, Rob, thank you for joining us and getting us started tonight. I want to turn now to Donald Trump's war on Iran, which, as I said earlier, is entering its 9th week. Iran presented a new offer to the U.S. after Trump canceled Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff's trip to Pakistan over the weekend. The deal would reportedly focus on opening the Strait of Hormuz and removing the U.S. blockade in the short term, with an agreement to delay negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. But today, Secretary of State Marco Rubio called the offer unacceptable because Iran would likely still try to charge tolls and maintain very tight control over who gets to actually use the strait. The Strait is, of course, ground zero for the international energy crisis that has been sparked by this war. The global price of oil now topped $108 a barrel today, and gas prices here at home continue to be over $4, now $4.11 a gallon. Airlines around the world are now making plans to deal with an overall shortage of jet fuel going into the summer months. And in the midst of all of this, today the president welcomed UK's King Charles and Queen Camilla for the first British state visit to the U.S. in almost 20 years. The king is set to address Congress tomorrow as the future of the NATO alliance is hanging in the balance. All right, we got a lot to cover. So let's get smarter with the help of our lead-off panel. We haven't even started, and I've got a sore throat from talking. Luke Broadwater, you better do a lot of the talking. Pulitzer Prize-winning White House correspondent for The New York Times. Susan Glasser, staff writer for The New Yorker, and Michael McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia and MS Now international affairs analyst. Luke, with Rubio now turning down this latest offer from Iran, is there any clear sign with what the White House wants to do next?
Well, I think it's a sign of how far away these two parties are to reaching a deal. The idea that the Iranians are going to turn over all of their nuclear material to the United States, which is what Donald Trump and Marco Rubio are insisting upon, seems highly unlikely. This is the leverage that they have with any negotiations with the international community. You'll recall that during the Obama administration, they did not even have this highly enriched uranium. They had agreed to keep it at much lower levels. But upon taking office, Donald Trump backed out of that deal and then hit Iran with a bunch of sanctions. So their feeling is in Iran that why would we agree to something if Donald Trump is known to break it and hit us with additional sanctions? They feel they need to keep their leverage. So I do not think that is likely to produce a deal anytime soon, those demands from the Trump administration.
Ambassador, let's talk about that, because Rubio turned down the deal because Iran would still have control over the Strait and could charge tolls. But how is the U.S. going to get out of this without that happening anyway?
Well, they better, because they weren't charging tolls before Trump's war. We got to be better off, not worse off, as a result of this war. And that's the dilemma that the Trump administration finds themselves in. They haven't achieved any of the objectives that they told us about. And I want to stress, it's their words, not mine. They were the ones that said we're eliminating their nuclear program. They were the ones that said we are providing the conditions for revolution, regime change in Iran. They were the ones that said we're eliminating and radically decreasing their conventional capabilities. And on that score, that's the only one they've done. They've eliminated a lot of their missiles and the Army, their Air Force and their Navy. There wasn't much of a Navy and Air Force to begin with. But even on that score, even the one that we can count and say they've eliminated a lot, well, they haven't eliminated enough because they have enough military capability to continue to close the Strait of Hormuz. So they have not achieved any of their objectives yet, and they don't seem to have any good plans or leverage to get to achieving some of those objectives.
Susan, today the German chancellor said that Iran's leadership is, quote, humiliating the U.S. as these talks are stalling. What does it say that one of our closest European allies is publicly using a word like that? I mean, let's be clear. Germany is no friend of Iran.
No, that's right. And in fact, Steph, Europe in particular is suffering directly as a result of the conflict. So, they are a very, very interested party here in a war that wasn't of their choosing. And I would point out that Donald Trump chose to undertake the war without consulting with America's allies. I know we've gotten used to a lot of things in the last decade, but, the U.S. never would have engaged in some kind of massive geopolitical upheaval like this without really intensively engaging with our allies and partners, if they were really allies and partners. Instead, as you know, Donald Trump has threatened essentially to blow up the entire NATO alliance because they failed to publicly support the war. But just to go back to Ambassador McFaul's point, because this is really important here, if you go down the list of objectives as President Trump has outlined them, one of the problems is that he's not even at the point in negotiations where they're talking about making any progress on those objectives. Remember, right now, the proposal that the Trump administration is rejecting from Iran, was a proposal essentially to reopen the Strait of Hormuz that was open before the war began. So essentially, Donald Trump has created the conditions for his own negotiating trap here by undertaking a war without being prepared for one of its most obvious potential consequences. I think that's the reason why people who understand this dynamic better than I do are looking at this and are very skeptical that there are any realistic near-term prospects for a real deal between the two parties, because they're just too far apart now, Steph. And the prospect of Trump achieving a win here seems very unrealistic at the negotiating table.
Michael, I'm dying to get you to weigh in on this one. Today, one of Iran's top officials met with Putin himself in Russia, and Putin said, and I want to get the quote correct, Putin said Iran is fighting courageously and heroically. What stuck out to you in this visit and how Russia is approaching this war?
Well, the first thing that stuck out is that Putin met with the foreign minister of Iran. Diplomatically speaking, he meets with heads of state. He doesn't meet with foreign ministers. He chose to have that meeting. He had the soundbite that you just quoted, and so did the foreign minister. I'm just looking at what he said here. I don't understand how President Trump can continue to do favors to Vladimir Putin. He just let one of his oligarchs' yacht go through our blockade, by the way. He just let a Russian oligarch go through this blockade. And he's given them this just incredible gift of these higher oil prices that is saving the Russian economy that was in real dire straits just a couple months ago. And now Putin, with all those gifts on the table, does this. I hope President Trump watches that clip, and I hope he rethinks his strategy vis-a-vis Vladimir Putin, because right now he makes him look weak. He makes him look like a fool.
Shouldn't Trump be humiliated by that? I mean, Putin's his boy.
I would hope he would be, and that's why I said it with so much emotion. But make no mistake, this is right in his face. Instead of meeting with our negotiators, the foreign minister is in Moscow, and he had a lovely meeting. He did the readout of how close they are. That was all done for the purposes of showing that they are with the Iranians, defying us and fighting for their independence. I mean, these are countries that are helping each other, and it's time, I think, for President Trump and his administration to understand that basic fact.
Steve Witkoff, who has been to Russia, 5, 6, maybe 9 times in the last year and a half. Wonder how he feels about that. Susan, The Atlantic is reporting that Vice President J.D. Vance has questioned how the Pentagon has depicted the war and is worried that the U.S. is now running low on our weapons. This is all according to people familiar with the situation. Who could be Vance's allies here? Because we're starting to see more and more of these Vance stories. What does it tell you that this one seems directly aimed at Pete Hegseth?
Well, look, there's a lot of politics inside this Trump administration. Donald Trump has often encouraged an atmosphere of infighting among his advisors. What's remarkable is that more of it hasn't spilled out up until this point. There are plenty of people inside Donald Trump's administration who came in there believing Donald Trump when he said he was going to be the president of no new wars. It's not just J.D. Vance, but many people inside the Pentagon, inside other parts of the Trump administration who would be skeptical about continuing this conflict in the Middle East. There are also people who can read inside the Trump administration, and I'm sure that includes in the vice president's office. It's not top secret information at this point that the Pentagon has expended a large amount of America's weapons in this strike. It's really notable, in fact, when you look at the war, very short war, 38 days war between the United States and Iran until the first ceasefire took effect. And the U.S. is firing off air defense missiles, huge amounts of ammunition. The Pentagon is using weapons that cost millions of dollars to shoot down Iranian drones that cost maybe $20,000, $30,000 a pop. And in that situation, they're running very low of weapons in a very short term. So it's interesting that J.D. Vance is raising this inside the administration's debates. The question is, why is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of Defense, according to this very good reporting for The Atlantic, not necessarily presenting accurate information to the president, never mind to the public?